They took her badge because she saved a man before permission arrived. At Rainier Harbor Medical Center in Tacoma, Dr. Hannah Voss stood near the exit with a cardboard box in her arms, her scrubs still marked with blood, her stethoscope lying on top like the last piece of a life they had just taken from her. Outside, rain hammered the glass. Inside, administrators whispered about liability, while a patient upstairs was still alive because she refused to wait. But then the roof began to shake. A Navy Seahawk was landing in the storm, and the military was asking for the one doctor the hospital had just thrown away. This is not just a story about medicine. It is about fear, command courage, and the terrible price of hesitation when seconds decide who lives. Stay until the end because one decision will change an entire hospital. Like this video and comment where you're watching from. Before the roof shook and the Navy came looking for her, Tacoma had already given Dr. Hannah Voss a warning. The city woke under a low gray sky, the kind that pressed against windows and made every street lamp glow like it was underwater. Rain swept in from Puget Sound and dragged itself across the docks, the bridges, the warehouses, and the black glass towers near the medical district. Ferries moved through the mist with their horns low and mournful. Somewhere beyond the harbor, a Coast Guard aircraft cut through the clouds and disappeared toward the water. Hannah drove through it all in an old black Ford Bronco that smelled faintly of coffee-wet canvas and engine oil. The windshield wipers worked hard and still lost the fight. A thin crack ran across the passenger side of the glass, branching near the corner like a frozen vein. On the seat beside her sat a faded navy fleece, a trauma bag, a folded ultrasound guide, and a bronze challenge coin so worn that the edges had gone smooth. She kept telling herself to put it in a drawer. She never did. Her phone lit up in the cup holder. "Dad," she let the voicemail play through the speakers. "Han, it's me. Weather looks nasty over there. Don't drive like you are chasing a medevac, and please eat something that did not come from a gas station. Call me after your shift." The message ended with a soft click. Hannah looked at the untouched coffee in the console. Gas station. Black. Bitter. Already cold. "Sorry, Dad," she murmured. At a red light near Pacific Avenue, her right hand rested on the steering wheel. A pale scar cut across the back of it, starting near the knuckle and disappearing toward the wrist. Most people noticed it only when she was close enough to touch them. Patients saw it when she checked pupils. Children asked about it. Adults looked away and pretended they had not. Hannah stared at the scar until the rain on the windshield turned into dust in her mind. A tent wall snapping in hot wind. A man on a field table, gray with blood loss. Rotor wash pounding the dirt outside. A voice yelling that they had to move. Her own voice, younger and rougher, saying, "Not while I still have my hands on him." A horn blared behind her. The light was green. Hannah blinked once, pressed the gas, and kept driving. Rainier Harbor Medical Center rose ahead through the storm, 12 floors of glass concrete and white light. It sat above the city like a ship that had forgotten the sea was only a few miles away. The hospital served Tacoma families, dock workers, veterans, sailors, Coast Guard crews, construction crews, and anyone unlucky enough to meet pain before sunrise. Hannah parked in the staff lot at 6:04. By 6:10, she was inside the emergency department. The place was already alive in the way emergency rooms were alive, not calm, not chaotic, but breathing through alarms. Footsteps ringing phones and voices trying not to become fear. A dock worker sat near triage with his left wrist wrapped in a towel, his face the color of wet paper. A teenager in a swim team jacket shivered under 2 blankets while his mother argued with registration about insurance. A fisherman held his thumb in the air with a hook buried deep through the skin and kept saying he was fine, which was the first sign that he was not. Near the vending machines, An old veteran named Earl Pruitt slept under a thin hospital blanket, his boots lined neatly beside the chair. Hannah stepped into the current and became part of it. She tied her hair back, dark blonde, loose strands already escaping. She took report from the night physician, signed 3 orders, changed 2 plans, and asked one question that made a nurse stop and recheck a blood pressure that had been entered wrong. She moved without hurry. That was what people noticed first. In an emergency room, everyone rushed until they learned speed was not the same as control. Hannah had learned it somewhere harder than this. Room 4 needs repeat vitals in 10, she said, scanning a chart. Room 6 gets imaging before pain meds convince him he has a spiritual recovery. And somebody, please tell Mr. Pruitt if he is going to pretend not to be a patient, he cannot keep stealing our warm blankets. Earl opened one eye from under the blanket. I heard that, Commander. I am not a commander anymore. You still give orders like one. Hannah walked over and tucked the blanket higher around his shoulder. You still complain like a chief. He grunted. That scar's still ugly. So are you. That is why we get along. At the nurse's station, Rebecca Morales watched them with a tablet tucked against her hip and a paper cup of coffee in her hand. Everyone called her Beck. She had worked emergency medicine for 22 years and had the kind of calm that did not come from optimism. It came from seeing enough terrible mornings to know panic wasted oxygen. You ever think about moving slower? Beck asked. Hannah signed another order. I tried. What happened? Patient complained. Beck took a sip of coffee and studied her over the rim. You look like you slept in your car. I have slept in worse places. That is not the reassuring sentence you think it is. Hannah finally looked at her. Beck's black hair was twisted into a tight bun. Her eyes missed nothing. That was the thing about good nurses. Doctors often saw the problem in front of them. Nurses saw the room around it. Hannah reached for a chart. Anything from night shift I need to know before the day tries to kill us. Beck's mouth tightened. Besides, Klein Hannah did not look up. What did he do now? Beck lifted her chin toward the upper administrative walkway. Dr. Adrian Klein stood behind the glass railing above the department. Tall, clean-shaven, charcoal suit, silver tie, one hand wrapped around a tablet. He looked down at the emergency room the way a man might look at storm damage from a safe balcony. Hannah followed Beck's gaze. Klein did not wave. He did not nod. He simply watched. He's been up there since before 6, Beck said. Maybe he is admiring our efficiency. He does not admire. He audits. Hannah slid the chart back. He audits everyone. Beck lowered her voice. Not like he audits you. Hannah turned toward the room 2 where the dock worker was trying to sit up against medical advice. Then I hope I'm giving him a good show. The morning thickened. A woman with chest pressure insisted it was stress until Hannah showed her the EKG and called cardiology. A child with a split chin stopped crying only when Hannah let him hold the penlight and named him Assistant Chief of Illumination. A sailor with a dislocated shoulder cursed with such creativity that Beck paused beside the curtain and said, I learned 2 new ones. Hannah guided the shoulder back into place with steady pressure. The sailor gasped, then blinked. That's it. I thought it would hurt more. It did. You just embarrassed yourself loudly through the worst part. He stared at her, then laughed once and winced. By 7:15, the message appeared on every staff tablet. Mandatory Emergency Services Compliance Meeting. Conference Room C. 7:30. A groan moved through the department, quiet but sincere. Beck stared at her screen. There it is. Hannah kept writing. The morning sermon. This one has teeth. Hannah looked up then. Beck's face had lost its humor. At 7:29, doctors, nurses, residents, charge staff, and department supervisors crowded into conference room C beside the administrative wing. Rain tapped against the long windows. The room smelled of coffee, antiseptic, damp jackets, and people who needed to be somewhere else. Dr. Adrian Klein stood at the front beside a large screen. The title slide read, Emergency Intervention Authorization Policy. The font was clean. The colors were soft. The words were not. Hannah stood near the back with Beck and Dr. Caleb Mercer, a first-year emergency medicine resident whose face still carried the open brightness of someone who believed exhaustion was temporary. Caleb held a notebook in one hand and a pen in the other. He wrote down too much because he did not yet know what mattered. Klein touched the remote. The slide changed to a flowchart. In recent months, he began Rainier Harbor has documented a concerning rise in unsupervised deviations from approved emergency pathways. Nobody moved. Hannah knew the language. Deviations meant decisions. Pathways meant permission. Approved meant someone who was not at the bedside had signed the idea in advance. Klein continued. We are a major civilian medical center serving a high-risk urban and military-adjacent population. That does not make us a combat facility. It makes our obligation to process even greater. His eyes passed over Hannah for less than a second. Effective, immediately invasive emergency procedures outside basic stabilization require approval from a senior attending surgical lead or assigned procedural authority. A surgeon near the front shifted in his chair. Dr. Warren Bell, 61, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with hands that had taught half the department what precision looked like. Younger doctors feared him until they realized his severity was not cruelty. It was a demand that people stop being careless with bodies. Klein clicked again. Any breach will trigger immediate disciplinary review. Caleb stopped writing. Beck stood very still beside Hannah. Hannah raised her hand. Klein paused as if he had been waiting for it. Yes, Doctor. Voss. What counts as basic stabilization? Klein clasped his hands in front of him. Airway management, chest compressions when indicated, medications, fluids, preparation for transfer, and supportive documentation. Hannah took one step away from the wall. And if the patient has a correctable cause of death that will kill them before approval arrives. The room tightened around the question. Klein gave a small practiced smile. The team continues resuscitation within policy, while authorization is obtained. Hannah looked at the flowchart. So the hospital remains protected. Klein's smile faded by a fraction. That is part of my responsibility. Protected from what? He said, nothing. Hannah asked it again, quieter. From a lawsuit or from a death? The silence had weight. Dr. Bell turned slightly in his chair. Rules exist because confidence can look a lot like recklessness. Hannah looked at him. I agree. That surprised the room more than an argument. She continued. Rules keep tired physicians from becoming dangerous physicians. They keep ego from wearing a white coat. They keep a bad day from becoming a funeral. Klein's expression remained still, but when a body is failing in front of us, Hannah said it does not care who is driving in from home. It does not care which signature is missing. It does not care whether risk management has had time to review the sentence. Klein set the remote down on the table. This meeting is not a philosophical debate. No, Hannah said. It is an operational one. Rain tapped harder against the glass. Klein's voice cooled. Dr. Voss, your prior service is respected here, but this department will not be run on battlefield reflexes. Hannah held his stare. The battlefield did not teach me to ignore rules. It taught me what happens when rules arrive late. No one spoke. Klein clicked to the final slide. The meeting ended 5 minutes later. People left quickly, returning to patients or pretending they did not want to stand too close to the argument. Caleb stayed beside Hannah in the hallway, notebook pressed to his chest. "Was that a bad idea?" he asked. "What part?" "The part where you made him hate you more." He came prepared. Caleb tried to smile. It did not hold. They walked toward the elevators. Beyond the windows, the morning had darkened. Clouds hung low over the city. Rain blurred the parking lot lights into long yellow lines. Caleb cleared his throat. "Can I ask you something?" "You already are. Were you really a Navy trauma surgeon, yes?" "Overseas?" "Yes." He hesitated. "Did it make civilian medicine easier?" The elevator arrived. The doors opened. An orderly pushed an empty wheelchair past them. Hannah stepped inside and watched the numbers above the doors. "No." Caleb looked at her. It made hesitation harder to forgive. He did not write that down. He just stood with it. Back in the emergency department, the day had picked up speed. Storm days always did. People slipped on stairs, cars found guardrails. Old pain flared lungs, tightened nerves broke. Beck claimed the barometric pressure made people stubborn. Hannah believed people were already stubborn, and the weather just gave them permission. At the nurse's station, Beck handed Hannah a fresh coffee. "From me." Hannah took it. "I am touched. You look like a ghost with a medical license. I have been worse." Beck's face changed. "You say that like it helps." Hannah looked toward the trauma bays where housekeeping had just finished mopping. "Klein's policy is going to slow us down." Beck leaned closer. Her voice dropped. "It already has." Hannah turned. Beck glanced toward the administrative hallway before she spoke again. "Last week, before your shift. Elderly woman after a fall, belly pain, pressure soft. Fast looked bad. Team waited for surgical approval because Klein's draft policy was already floating around." Hannah listened. "They got approval eventually," Beck said. Her jaw tightened. She coded in the elevator. Hannah's hand stilled on the coffee cup. "Did she survive?" Beck did not answer. Across the department, Klein appeared from a side corridor with two administrators. One of them said something that made the other smile. Klein did not. His eyes found Hannah again. Hannah looked away first. "Did anyone file a concern?" Beck gave a quiet laugh without humor. "People here have mortgages." Hannah looked toward room 6, where a patient was arguing with a nurse about discharge instructions he had not heard because he had been too busy insisting he was fine. The ER kept moving around them. Monitors beeped. Phones rang. Rubber soles squeaked on wet tile. Somewhere behind a curtain, a child began crying with the fierce outrage of the living. Caleb walked up with a chart in one hand. "Dr. Voss, room 8 has worsening abdominal pain, but pressure is stable. I ordered labs and imaging." Hannah scanned the chart. "Good. What are you worried about? Appendicitis, maybe?" "Could be kidney stone. Could be nothing." "Nothing is not a diagnosis." He nodded quickly. "Right. Sorry." "Do not apologize. Think." He took the chart back. "Think what hurts, what kills, what can wait." Hannah gave him a brief look. "Better." He went back toward the room, shoulders a little straighter. Beck watched him go. "He follows you around like a duckling with student loans. He will be good, if Klein does not scare the medicine out of him first." Hannah said nothing. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her father. "Rain looks worse on the news. Eat something." She typed back with one thumb. "Working. I will call later." She did not send the part where she wanted to say she was tired. Not sleepy tired, not end-of-shift tired, a deeper kind. The kind that settled into bone after too many rooms where the clock had teeth. She put the phone away. The ambulance radio crackled. Every head near the desk lifted. Medic 7 inbound. 69-year-old male, severe chest pain, hypotensive, diaphoretic, altered mental status, ETA 3 minutes. Beck set down her coffee. Hannah was already moving. Trauma 2. The doors to the ambulance bay opened against the rain, and the storm came in first. Cold air rolled across the trauma floor. Red light flashed over the wet tile. The paramedics came through fast shoulders-hunched boots, squeaking, one of them riding the stretcher rail with a hand pressed against the patient's chest, as if he could hold the man's life in place by force. 69-year-old male, the lead medic, called. Thomas Grady. Sudden chest pain at home. Pressure dropped en route. Altered pale diaphoretic. Aspirin given. 1 nitro before pressure tanked. Rhythm unstable. He's fading on us. Thomas Grady looked too large for the stretcher and too small inside his own skin. He had the thick hands of a man who had spent his life fixing things that resisted being fixed. His hair was silver and pasted to his forehead. His mouth opened and closed around air that did not seem to satisfy him. Behind the stretcher came his wife. June Grady was small-soaked and furious with fear. She wore a yellow raincoat over pajamas and house slippers. In one hand she clutched a brown leather work glove. It looked old, crease-darkened by years of grease and use. "Tom," she said, trying to keep pace, "you stay with me. You hear me? Don't you leave me in this hospital with one glove." Thomas tried to turn toward her voice, but his eyes lost focus halfway there. Hannah stepped to the head of the bed as the team transferred him. "Mr. Grady, I'm Dr. Voss. You're at Rainier Harbor. I need you to look at me." His eyes found hers for one trembling second. "Chest," he whispered. "Feels like a truck parked on me." "I know," Hannah said. "We're going to work fast." Beck was already placing leads. Caleb moved to the right side with an IV kit. Another nurse cut Thomas's shirt open. The monitor came alive with an ugly rhythm that made the room tighten. "Pressure," Hannah said. Beck read it out and the number was bad. Again in 1 minute. Caleb, large bore line. Type and cross. CBC, chemistry troponin, coag panel. Page cardiology and cardiothoracic. "Tell Bell I need eyes on him now." Caleb's hands moved quickly, but his face had gone pale. "Could be a massive MI," he said. "Could be." Hannah answered. She reached for the ultrasound probe. June stood just beyond the glass doors, held back by a tech with a kind voice and helpless hands. Her wet hair clung to her face. She kept the glove pressed against her chest like it was a relic. Thomas groaned. "June, I'm here," she called. "I'm right here, Tom." Hannah moved the probe across his chest. Gray shapes shifted on the screen. The image wavered as Thomas struggled to breathe. "Hold still if you can," she said. He tried. That was all she could ask of him. The screen sharpened. A dark rim appeared where Hannah did not want to see it. Caleb leaned closer. "Fluid, small effusion," Hannah said. Beck looked at her. "That's small?" "For now." The words hung in the room. The phone at the nurse's desk rang. Beck listened, then covered the receiver. "Bell is scrubbed in upstairs. He says he can be here in 15. Hannah did not look away from the screen. "Whose backup Dr. Lynn is stuck near the Narrows. Crash on the bridge. Unknown arrival." The monitor dipped. Thomas's eyes fluttered. Hannah touched his shoulder. "Thomas, stay with me." He did not answer. Caleb checked the pressure again. "It's dropping. Repeat ultrasound." Beck moved beside Hannah close enough that only she could hear. "You're thinking it. I'm confirming it." The probe touched skin again. The dark space had grown. The heart moved inside pressure it could not escape. Hannah felt the room sharpen. The beeping monitor. The rain against the ambulance doors. June, crying without making a sound. Caleb, breathing too fast beside her. Thomas's lips began to blue. "Pressure is crashing," Caleb said. Hannah looked toward the hall. No surgeon, no approval, only Klein's policy sitting in her mind like a locked door. Senior authorization required. She saw Klein at the far end of the corridor. He stood with a tablet in one hand speaking to an administrator, but his eyes were on Trauma 2. Thomas convulsed once. Then he went still. The monitor screamed. Caleb's voice broke before he could control it. "He's pulseless." Beck hit the alarm. Code Blue, Trauma 2. The room changed shape at once. A nurse started compressions. Oxygen flowed. Medication was drawn. The crash cart slammed against the bed. Someone pulled open a drawer too hard, and a package of electrodes slid onto the floor. June pressed both palms to the glass. "No," she whispered. Hannah stood at Thomas's side, staring at the ultrasound image still burned into her mind. Blood around the heart. Pressure rising. A man dying from something she could fix, if the room would let her. Caleb looked at her. "Dr. Voss, what do we do?" Hannah looked toward the elevator. Still no bell, still no permission, still no time. She reached for sterile gloves. The room held its breath. Caleb stared at her hands. "We don't have authorization." Hannah snapped the first glove on. "We don't have a pulse either." Beck's eyes held hers for one sharp second. "Klein will bury you." Hannah pulled on the second glove. "Then he can dig after Thomas has a heartbeat." For half a second no one moved. Then Beck turned and fired orders with the force of a rifle shot. Thoracotomy tray. Betadine. Suction. Light over here. Blood in the room now. Move. The team obeyed because Beck's voice did not leave space for doubt. Hannah looked at Caleb. "Listen to me." He swallowed. "Yes, ma'am. His heart is being squeezed from the outside. Drugs will not fix that. Compressions will not fix that. Waiting will not fix that." His eyes flicked to June behind the glass. Hannah lowered her voice. "You can step out. No one will blame you." The nurse on compressions counted under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. Caleb looked at Thomas, then back at Hannah. "No," he said. "Tell me what you need." Hannah nodded once. "Hold pressure here when I tell you. Do not pull away unless I tell you. If you feel like you are going to pass out, say it before you hit the floor." "I understand." "No," Hannah said. "You are trying to understand. For now, just listen." His jaw tightened. "Yes, ma'am." She cleaned the skin fast. Her hands did not tremble. Around her, the storm and the code faded into a narrow tunnel of sound. Packaging tore. Metal touched metal. Suction hissed. Beck kept air moving into Thomas's lungs with steady hands. Hannah made the incision. The room seemed to inhale. Blood welled, dark, sudden. Caleb flinched but stayed where she had placed him. "Stay with me," Hannah said. "I'm here. Then be here with both hands." He adjusted. Suction cleared the field. Hannah worked with controlled speed, opening only what she needed, not more. Panic, wasted blood, wasted motion, wasted life. "Pause compressions," she said. The compressions stopped. The monitor stayed flat. Hannah released the trapped pressure around Thomas's heart. For one long second, nothing happened. Then the heart gave a weak, stubborn movement. Beck saw it first. Electrical activity. Hannah kept working. "Come on, Thomas." Another movement. Caleb leaned closer, eyes wide. "Is that a rhythm? Do not celebrate early." Beck checked. "I have a faint pulse." A nurse at the foot of the bed exhaled a sound that was almost a sob. Hannah did not soften. Pressure 60 palpable. Fluids running. Blood as soon as it arrives. Page Bell again and tell him he has an open chest waiting for him. Caleb kept his hand exactly where she had placed it. Sweat ran down his temple. His eyes were no longer bright with theory. They were focused on the place where life had become something he could feel under his fingers. The trauma bay doors slid open. Dr. Adrian Klein entered with 2 administrators behind him. Dr. Warren Bell stepped in a moment later wearing a surgical scrubs mask loose at his neck. He took in the field in one look, and whatever irritation had followed him down from the operating floor vanished. His eyes became cold and useful. Klein saw the blood first, then the tray, then Hannah's hands inside the procedure he had forbidden. "What have you done?" he asked. Hannah did not turn. Bought him time. "You performed an invasive procedure without authorization." His heart had stopped. Klein stepped closer. "You had no right." Bell moved to the opposite side of the bed and looked down into the field. He did not speak for several seconds. Then he said, "She decompressed the tamponade." Klein looked at him sharply. Bell kept his eyes on Thomas. He would have died. "That is not the issue," Klein said. Hannah finally looked up. Blood marked her gown. One strand of hair had fallen loose against her cheek. Her eyes were tired, but there was nothing apologetic in them. It was the only issue in this room. Klein stared at her as if she had struck him. Bell stepped into position. "I'm taking him to surgery." Hannah handed over with clipped precision. Timeline. Vitals. Ultrasound findings. Arrest. Intervention. Medications. Return of pulse. Blood ordered. Every word necessary. Every word calm. Caleb listened as if the structure of the report itself was holding Thomas alive. The transport team arrived. Lines were secured. Blood was hung. Monitors shifted. Thomas was rolled toward the elevator with Bell walking beside him, one hand steady on the rail. June broke past the tech and rushed forward. "Where are you taking him?" Bell looked at Hannah, then at June. "To the operating room. He is alive because Dr. Voss acted quickly." June turned toward Hannah. For a moment, no words came. Her hand shook around the old glove. "Is he going to live?" Hannah wanted to give her the answer families came begging for. She had learned not to. "He has a chance now." June's knees almost folded. Beck caught her by the elbow. June reached for Hannah's hand, not caring about the blood. "You brought him back." Hannah stood still as the woman gripped her fingers. "He fought hard." June shook her head. "I saw him. I saw that screen. I know what happened." Her voice cracked. She pressed the glove to her chest. "This fell off in the ambulance. I kept holding it because I thought if I kept one piece of him, maybe he would stay." Something in Hannah's face changed just enough to hurt. "Keep it," she said. "He'll want it when he wakes up." June began to cry again, but now there was breath in it. Behind them, Klein watched with the stillness of a man refusing to let the room mean what it clearly meant. Hannah stepped into the scrub area and washed Thomas's blood from her hands. The water ran red, then pink, then pale. She stared at it too long. Caleb appeared in the doorway. "You were right." Hannah shut off the faucet. "That is not the part you remember." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You remember why we knew. You remember what we saw. You remember what did not work. You remember the exact moment the patient ran out of time." Caleb looked down. "I was scared. Good." His head lifted. "Good fear means you understand the size of the room. Just do not let it hold the scalpel." Before he could answer, Klein's voice cut through the hall. "Dr. Voss. My office, now." Beck stepped forward. "She needs to chart." Klein did not look at her. Now. The walk to his office took less than 2 minutes. It felt longer because everyone knew. Nurses paused near workstations. A tech stood frozen with an armful of linens. A patient's daughter watched Hannah pass without understanding the whole story, but feeling its weight anyway. Klein's office was glass order and rain. Framed awards lined one wall. Patient safety leadership, administrative excellence. A photograph showed him shaking hands with a state senator. Hannah stood in front of his desk. Klein closed the door. For a moment he said nothing. He placed both hands on the back of his chair and looked down as if controlling his breathing. Then he turned. "You have left me no choice." Hannah let the silence sit. He opened a folder. "Your actions violated emergency intervention policy chain of command, procedural authorization standards, documentation requirements, and risk management protocol." He was in cardiac arrest. "That does not erase procedure." "No," Hannah said. "It explains urgency." Klein looked at her with open contempt. "You still think this is about courage. I think it is about a man whose wife was watching him die. You think emotion gives you permission. I think physiology gave me permission." Klein struck the folder with 2 fingers. "You exposed this hospital to liability. And he is alive. You got lucky." Something in Hannah's face went cold. Luck is what people call skill when they do not like who used it. Klein's eyes narrowed. "This attitude is exactly why you are dangerous. Because I act, because you believe your judgment matters more than the system." Hannah stepped closer to the desk. "When the system is 12 minutes away and the patient has 3, my judgment is the system." Rain tapped hard against the glass. Klein pulled a document from the folder and placed it on the desk. "Effective immediately, your privileges at Rainier Harbor Medical Center are suspended pending formal review. Your employment is terminated." The words landed with less force than Hannah expected. Maybe because she had known the price when she reached for the gloves. Maybe because consequences always arrived after the bleeding stopped. She looked at the paper, then at Klein. "You are firing me for saving Thomas Grady. I am firing you for insubordination." "No," she said quietly. "You are firing me because he lived. And that makes your policy look exactly as slow as it is." Klein's face flushed. "Security will escort you out." Hannah nodded once. "Of course they will." She turned to leave. Klein spoke again. "Dr. Voss." She stopped with her hand on the door. "If you ever practice like this again, someone will die." Hannah did not turn around. Someone almost did. Then she opened the door and walked out. The locker room was empty. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Someone had left a damp towel on the bench. A half-open locker held a child's drawing taped inside the door. Hannah opened hers. There was not much to take. A spare set of scrubs, a cracked mug that read, "Trust me, I am mostly awake," a trauma handbook with notes in the margins, a photograph of her younger self in desert fatigues beside a medevac helicopter standing with 3 service members who had all believed they had more time than they did. At the bottom of the locker lay a patch. "Forward Surgical Team." She picked it up. For a moment, the room was gone. Heat pressed against her face. Rotor wash filled her ears. A young Navy officer on a table bleeding faster than they could replace it. Someone shouting that the perimeter was breaking. Someone else saying they had to move. Her own voice. "Not while I'm still touching him." A locker door creaked behind her. Hannah blinked. Beck stood in the doorway. Neither woman spoke at first. Then Beck said, "Thomas made it to the operating room." Hannah closed her hand around the patch. "Good. Bell said your call gave him a chance. Bell should be careful saying that out loud." Beck stepped inside. "I'm sorry." Hannah gave a small shrug that fooled no one. "I knew the price. That does not make it right. No, it makes it predictable. Beck's eyes shone, but her voice stayed steady. June is downstairs asking for you. Hannah shook her head. I can't. She wants to thank you. I know. Then let her. Hannah shut the locker. If I go down there right now, Klein will turn it into theater. He will say I am manipulating a family before review. Beck's mouth tightened because she knew it was true. Hannah placed the patch into the cardboard box. Tell her I'm glad Thomas made it upstairs. Beck looked at the box in Hannah's arms. You are not the warning sign, Han. Hannah's eyes flickered. Beck continued. You are the flare they shoot into the sky when everyone else pretends the ship is not sinking. For a second, Hannah almost smiled. Then her phone buzzed. A text from her father. Storm looks bad. Call me after shift. Hannah stared at the screen. Her shift was over. Her job was over. She put the phone away. Security met her near the service elevator. The guard on duty was named Luis. Broad shoulders, kind eyes. He looked miserable. I'm sorry, Doc. Hannah adjusted the box against her hip. You are doing your job. Luis looked at the floor. You stitched my daughter's face last year after that bike wreck. I remember. She still says you made her laugh before the needle. Tell her helmets are less dramatic than scars. Luis gave a weak laugh, then wiped at one eye, as if rain had followed him inside. They walked the long hallway toward the lobby. The emergency department ran beside them on the other side of the glass. Hannah kept her eyes forward, but she felt every face. Caleb, near Trauma 2, pale and motionless. Beck at the nurse's station, arms folded tight. Earl Pruitt awake beneath his blanket, watching like an old soldier watching another one leave the wire. At the elevator, Caleb broke away and caught up. Dr. Voss. Luis glanced at Hannah. She nodded. Caleb stopped in front of her, breathing hard. I should have said more. You said enough. No. I froze. You came back. His eyes were red. They're going to make it sound like you were reckless. Probably. But you weren't. Hannah shifted the box and looked at him without softness that lied. Then remember the difference. He nodded. She stepped into the elevator. The doors began to close. Caleb reached out suddenly, stopping them. What do I do now? Hannah looked at him. You learn the rules well enough to know when they are saving a life and when they are saving a chair. His hand dropped. The doors closed. In the lobby, the storm made the windows tremble. Visitors moved around puddles tracked in from the street. A little girl in a purple coat stared at Hannah's box as if doctors were not supposed to carry their own things. Klein stood near the security desk with 2 administrators. He did not approach. He did not need to. His presence was the signature at the bottom of the sentence. Hannah walked past him. For 1 second, their eyes met. He looked certain. She looked tired. That was not the same as beaten. The automatic doors opened. Cold rain pushed into the lobby. Then the building began to vibrate. At first it was subtle. A pulse beneath the floor. A tremor in the glass. The little girl covered her ears. Someone at reception looked up. The sound deepened. Rotors. Heavy. Close. Luis turned toward the ceiling. What in God's name above them? Somewhere on the roof, a helicopter descended through the storm. Hannah stopped just inside the doors, rain blowing across her face. Her cardboard box rested against her ribs. Her stethoscope sat on top. The elevator behind her opened with a soft chime. Klein stepped into the lobby, angry, now confused now. The rotor thunder grew so loud that every conversation died beneath it. Hannah looked up. For the first time all day, Rainier Harbor Medical Center was the one waiting for permission. The roof shook again, and the sound rolled through the lobby like thunder trapped inside the bones of the building. Hannah stood just inside the automatic doors, rain blowing across her face, cardboard box pressed against her side. Her stethoscope lay on top, black tubing coiled over the trauma manual and the worn Navy coin. Around her, the lobby had gone still. Visitors stared upward. A child cried once, then buried her face against her mother's coat. Nurses leaned over the second-floor railings. Even the security guard stopped pretending this was normal. The hospital radio crackled from the reception desk. Roof helipad reports military aircraft down. Navy Seahawk, crew requesting immediate contact with Dr. Hannah Voss. Dr. Adrian Klein turned toward the desk. That is not authorized. No one answered him. The elevator chimed. The doors opened. A man in soaked Navy flight gear stepped out first. Rainwater ran from his shoulders to the polished floor. 2 corpsmen followed him, each carrying sealed medical packs. The man moved with a calm urgency that parted the lobby without a raised voice. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, with dark hair cut close, and eyes that searched faces the way pilots searched weather. Then his gaze found Hannah. For 1 second, the storm seemed to leave his face. Dr. Voss. Hannah did not move. Ethan. Commander Ethan Rowe stopped 10 feet from her. 8 years had added lines around his eyes and a quiet weight to the way he stood, but Hannah knew him. She knew the voice. She knew the look of a man who had once been gray with blood loss under canvas walls while the ground shook from incoming fire. Klein stepped between them. This physician is no longer employed by Rainier Harbor Medical Center. Any military request must go through administration. Ethan looked at Klein for the first time. We are not here for administration. Klein's expression hardened. You landed a Navy aircraft on my hospital without authorization. A pilot is dying offshore. The lobby changed around that sentence. Hannah's fingers tightened on the cardboard box. Ethan turned back to her. Lieutenant Mason Cole. Carrier landing accident aboard the USS Resolute. Severe blunt chest trauma. Hypotensive. Respiratory collapse. Ship medical reports possible tamponade, possible major vascular injury, possible massive hemothorax. Weather has delayed full transfer. Hannah's eyes sharpened. How long since injury? 34 minutes. Who was with him? 1 medical officer, 2 corpsmen, no trauma surgeon. Klein spoke sharply. You cannot remove a civilian physician from this facility. Hannah looked at him. You just did. A murmur moved through the lobby. Klein's face flushed, but Ethan had already stepped closer. We need the surgeon who kept me alive in Kandahar. The words struck harder than the rotor thunder. Beck had reached the lobby by then, breathless from the stairs. Caleb stood behind her, pale, his eyes moving from Ethan to Hannah. Luis, the security guard, held himself very still beside the door. Hannah looked down at the box in her arms. Her badge was gone. Her job was gone. Thomas Grady's blood was drying into her scrub sleeve. Her body was so tired that the floor seemed to pull at her feet. Then she lifted the stethoscope from the box and looped it around her neck. What is his oxygen saturation? Ethan nodded to one of the corpsmen. Last report was 86 on assisted ventilation. Chest tube placed. Initial output heavy, then slowed. Could be clotting inside. That is what ship medical thinks. Hannah handed the cardboard box to Luis. Keep this dry. Luis blinked. Yes, ma'am. Klein stepped forward. Dr. Voss, if you leave with them, this hospital accepts no responsibility for anything that happens. Hannah turned toward him. Rain moved behind her through the open doors. Good. You have spent all day practicing. She followed Ethan toward the elevator. Inside, the ride to the roof was loud with silence. The corpsmen checked their packs. Ethan stood facing the doors, jaw set, gloved hands flexing once at his sides. Hannah watched the floor numbers climb. Ethan glanced at her. You look like hell. You always did lead with charm. I heard you were in Tacoma. I heard you retired from getting shot." He almost smiled, slowed down. That is not the same thing. The doors opened into rain and rotor wash. The Seahawk waited on the helipad blades, cutting the storm into silver sheets. The city spread below them in wet lights. Beyond the buildings, Puget Sound was a dark, restless plain under a bruised sky. Ethan reached back to help her into the cabin. Hannah did not need it, but the wind was vicious, and her legs had started to notice the day. She took his hand and climbed in. Inside the helicopter smelled of fuel, wet nylon, cold metal, and old urgency. Hannah strapped in across from Ethan. A corpsman handed her a tablet sealed in a waterproof case. The aircraft lifted. Rainier Harbor dropped beneath them, first the roof, then the glass front, then the emergency entrance where Hannah had almost walked out with a box and no future. Now she was airborne again. Ethan leaned forward over the engine noise. "You good?" Hannah scrolled through Mason Cole's data. No. She enlarged the vitals and scanned the ultrasound stills. "But I'm working." The tablet showed Lieutenant Mason Cole, 28 naval aviator, married, no known drug allergies. Hard landing during storm operations. Aircraft damaged. Pilot extracted conscious, then deteriorated. Severe left chest trauma. Decreased breath sounds. Neck veins distended early, then flat after bleeding increased. Unstable rhythm during transfer below deck. The ultrasound images were poor, grainy, taken by someone working in bad light on a moving ship. Still, they told enough. "He has two problems," Hannah said. Ethan leaned closer. "Talk to me. He is bleeding into his chest, and there is likely pressure around the heart. If the aorta is torn, he needs a full operating room. If it is a smaller vascular tear or cardiac injury, I can buy time." "How much?" "That depends on what he has left to spend." The younger corpsman across from her swallowed. His name tape read Brooks. "Ma'am, our medical officer said he might not survive being opened aboard ship." Hannah looked at him. He might not. Brooks stared back, hope and fear fighting on his face. But without surgery, she said he dies without an argument. No one spoke for several seconds. Rain hammered the helicopter windows. Lightning flashed somewhere behind the clouds, turning the cabin white for an instant. Ethan looked out into the storm. "Captain Hale is concerned about authority. Civilian surgeon on a carrier, active duty patient, no formal credentialing, no proper surgical suite." Hannah gave a short breath that might have been a laugh on another day. "Your captain has good lawyers. He also has a dying pilot. That is the part I care about." Ethan's eyes stayed on her. "If you do this, command may question every decision. They can question after he has a pulse." The rotor sound deepened. For 1 second it was not Puget Sound under them. It was desert, dust, heat, the smell of blood and burned fabric. A younger Ethan lay open on a field table, face gray beneath sand and sweat. The surgical tent shook from a blast close enough to rattle instruments off the tray. Someone shouted that the perimeter was breaking. Someone else said the patient was gone. Hannah remembered her own hands inside the wound, holding pressure where pressure was the only wall left between a man and death. Ethan's eyes had opened for half a second that night. Terror had stripped rank and pride from his face. She had told him, "Stay angry." Angry men breathe. He had tried. Somehow he had. The helicopter jolted hard in turbulence. Hannah came back to the cabin. Ethan was watching her. "You remember?" he asked. "I remember too much." He nodded once and did not ask for more. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset. 10 minutes to Resolute. Hannah turned to Brooks. "What do you have in those packs?" They opened them across the cabin floor as best they could in the shaking aircraft. Portable ultrasound, airway supplies, blood tubing, emergency thoracotomy tray, medications, dressings, clamps, sutures. Not enough. Never enough. Any vascular set aboard, Hannah asked. Limited general surgical kit in sickbay, Brooks said. Damage control may have fine mechanical clamps if needed. Not sterile. They can process them fast. Clean is not sterile, Hannah said, then looked through the rain at the dark water below. But sometimes clean is what the clock gives you. Brooks stared at her. Ethan almost smiled again. The helicopter banked. The ocean appeared below, black and heaving. Far ahead, lights emerged from the storm. At first, they looked like a city floating in weather. Then the shape became clear. The USS Resolute, a steel island in the water. Flight deck lights glowed red and white through sheets of rain. Aircraft were chained down along the deck. Crew members in colored jerseys moved like small figures against a world of wind steel and water. The Seahawk descended hard. The deck rose beneath them, vanished in spray, then rose again. Hannah tightened her grip on the harness. The aircraft touched down with a heavy jolt. The side door opened, and the storm came inside. Ethan jumped down first, then turned to help Hannah. The deck was slick beneath her boots. Wind punched the breath from her chest. A deck crewman waved them forward, bent low under the rotor wash. Somewhere nearby, an alarm pulsed through the ship. Captain Marcus Hale met them just beyond the landing zone. He was in his 50s, square-faced, rain running from the brim of his cap. His eyes moved quickly over Hannah, taking in the scrubs under her flight jacket, the dried blood near one cuff, the stethoscope around her neck. Dr. Voss, I appreciate your arrival under difficult conditions. I appreciate your patient choosing a dramatic day. Hale blinked once, then motioned them forward. They crossed the deck as a wave broke against the side of the carrier, throwing spray into the air like shattered glass. The ship rolled beneath Hannah, not enough to knock her down, but enough to remind every bone in her body that this was not ground. Hale spoke as they moved. My medical officer believes Lieutenant Cole is too unstable for transfer and too unstable for surgery here. Hannah kept pace beside him. He is not stable enough for indecision either. Hale looked at her. We have a chain of command. I respect that. Do you? She glanced at him. I was Navy before I was civilian, and yet I am told you left your hospital under conflict. Your pilot can file a complaint if I offend him. Ethan coughed once behind her, covering what might have been a laugh. Hale did not smile. They entered the ship. The sound changed at once. The open roar of the deck became metal corridors, boots, voices, alarms, machinery, the living pulse of a warship. Crew members pressed themselves aside as the captain led Hannah down narrow passageways. The walls were close. The air smelled of oil salt, disinfectant sweat, and electricity. Urgency had the same language everywhere. They reached sickbay. It was bright, cramped, and crowded with fear. Lieutenant Mason Cole lay on a narrow table, stripped of flight gear, a breathing tube secured at his mouth. His skin was wax pale under the overhead lights. A wedding ring hung from a chain at his neck, taped so it would not slip aside. Blood stained the sheets beneath his left side. A chest tube ran to a container already dark with output. A medical officer turned from the monitor. Dr. Peter Shaw looked as if he had aged 10 years in 1 hour. His sleeves were rolled up. Blood marked his forearms. His eyes were sharp but exhausted. You are Voss. Yes. Good. Tell me you brought a miracle. I brought hands. Show me what happened. Shaw moved fast, grateful for someone who did not need comfort. Hard landing. Left thoracic impact. Awake at first, complaining of chest pain and shortness of breath. Deteriorated fast. We placed a chest tube. Initial output high, then slowed, but pressure kept dropping. Ultrasound showed possible pericardial fluid. Image was terrible. He arrested once during transfer from the flight deck. We got him back. Hannah stepped to the table. Mason's monitor showed a weak pressure and a rhythm with very little patience left. She placed her stethoscope against his chest, then took the ultrasound probe. The ship rolled. The image blurred. Hold him steady. 2 coursemen braced the bed. Hannah adjusted the probe, pressed, angled, waited, breathed. There, blood in the chest, fluid around the heart. Not a clean picture. Enough. She looked at Shaw. He needs to be opened. Shaw nodded grimly. I know. Here. His face tightened. Hannah looked around the sick bay. The room was too small, the table was too narrow, the light was too harsh and not bright enough. The ship was moving. The instruments were limited. The blood supply was thin. She had worked in worse places. Yes, she said, here. Captain Hale stood near the door. Dr. Voss, before you proceed, I need clarity on authority. Hannah turned to him. No, Captain. You need clarity on responsibility. His expression hardened. She continued before he could speak. This is your ship. That is your pilot. I respect both, but once I open his chest, that table is my operating room, not because I outrank you, because his body will not survive a committee. The room went still. Ethan watched Hale. Shaw watched Hannah. Brooks looked at the captain. Hale's eyes stayed on Hannah's. After a long moment, he said, You have medical authority in this room. Hannah nodded. Then we move. The room snapped alive. Shaw pulled instruments. Brooks checked suction. Another corpsman secured the blood tubing. Ethan stayed near the doorway close enough to help far enough not to crowd the field. Hale remained outside the threshold, one hand braced against the wall as the ship rolled again. Hannah scrubbed at the small sink. The water ran over her hands. For the second time that day, she watched blood disappear down a drain. Her hands were steady until they were not. It was brief, a flicker, a tremor in her fingers. She closed both hands into fists and held them under the water until the shaking stopped. Ethan saw it from the doorway. You good? Hannah did not look at him, no. The water shut off. She reached for a towel. But I'm working. Shaw helped her gown. As she gloved, Mason stirred under sedation. His eyes opened just enough to show pain and confusion. Hannah leaned over him. Lieutenant Cole. I'm Dr. Voss. His gaze found her in pieces. Aircraft. His voice was rough around the tube and air. Hannah understood the question under the question. You brought it home. His eyes moved unfocused. My wife. Hannah placed one gloved hand near his shoulder. You can tell her yourself when you wake up. The monitor dipped. Shaw looked at her. Pressure is falling again. Hannah picked up the scalpel. Then we stopped talking. The ship rolled under her feet as the blade touched skin. Hannah did not fight the movement. She let her knees soften. Buildings lied. They made doctors believe the floor was a promise. Ships told the truth. Nothing stayed still. Not blood, not time, not fear. Light closer, she said. Brooks adjusted the lamp. Too much shadow on the left. He moved it again. There. Shaw stood across from her gloved hands, ready eyes fixed on the field. He had been carrying Mason alone for nearly an hour. Now that the decision had been made, exhaustion gave way to work. Suction ready, he said. 2 units hanging, 4 more available. After that, we borrow from healthy sailors. Hannah made the first incision. Mason's monitor kept up its thin, angry rhythm. His oxygen level hovered too low. His blood pressure floated on the edge of collapse, dipping with every roll of the ship as if the ocean itself were pulling him down. Outside, sickbay boots hammered along the passageway. Crew members shouted orders. Somewhere above them, aircraft chains clanged against the deck. Inside the room, Hannah's voice became the center of gravity. "Brooks, keep suction where I can see it. Shaw retraction. Monitor call pressure every 30 seconds unless it drops. Then call it before your brain finishes being scared." The young corpsman at the monitor nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." The ship rolled again. A tray of gauze slid toward the edge of the counter. Ethan reached through the doorway and caught it before it fell. He set it back without a word. Hannah kept her eyes down. "Thank you, Commander. Just keeping the furniture alive. Try the patient next." A brief breath of laughter moved through the room and vanished. Hannah opened deeper. Blood welled. Brooks moved in with suction. "Careful," she said. "Do not chase it. Let me find where it wants to go." The field cleared enough for her to see what the chest tube had not solved. Clotted blood, too much of it. The injury was hiding behind the heart and lung, moving with every pulse, every breath, every shift of the ship. Shaw's eyes narrowed. "That is more than a simple hemothorax." "I know. Could be great vessel, I know that too." The monitor complained again. "Pressure, 70/40. Hannah did not answer. She was inside the work now, every sense tightened around the next useful detail. Mason's chest rose under the ventilator. Too stiff. Too slow. His body was being kept alive by machines, blood bags, hands, and stubbornness. More suction. Brooks moved closer. Not there. Lower. Yes. The ship dropped under them. For half a second, Hannah felt weightless. A clamp slid from a towel and rang against the floor. The young corpsman grabbed the monitor stand before it tipped. "Everybody still?" Hannah asked. A chorus of strained voices answered. "Still. Good. The patient did not get the memo, so neither do we." She found the first bleeding source, a torn intercostal vessel, small but vicious, pouring steadily into a space that had no room left to give. Clamp. Shaw placed it in her hand. She controlled it fast. The bleeding slowed, but the pressure did not rise. Shaw looked at the monitor. That was not the main event. No. Hannah adjusted her angle and slid her fingers carefully behind the heart. There it was. A swelling tension, a wrong fullness, blood trapped around the heart, squeezing it from the outside. "Pericardium is tight," she said. Shaw's face went still. "Tamponade mixed with vascular trauma. Likely. Can you access it? I can access anything if the ship stops trying to throw me into a cabinet." Captain Hale stood behind Ethan, rain still dripping from his jacket onto the deck. His eyes moved from the monitor to Hannah's hands and back again. Command had trained him to make decisions from information. This room offered him almost none. Only numbers falling, alarms sounding, and a civilian doctor standing over his pilot with blood to her wrists. Hannah opened the pericardium. A rush of dark blood escaped. The monitor changed at once. One stronger beat, then another. The corpsman at the monitor leaned forward. "Pressure is coming up. 86/50. Shaw exhaled. "Good response." "Temporary response," Hannah said. "Find the source." The word temporary settled over the room like cold air. Mason's heart beat in the opened space, wounded but fighting. Hannah watched the motion read the rhythm, followed the blood. It was not just around the heart. It was behind it, pulsing from a place she did not like. Shaw saw her expression. "What is it? Small tear near the proximal descending thoracic aorta, or a branch close enough to ruin everyone's night?" Shaw's eyes flicked to the instrument tray. "We do not have vascular control for that." I noticed. The monitor called them back. "Pressure dropping, 78 systolic." Hannah held pressure with 2 fingers and gauze gentle enough not to make the tear worse, firm enough to slow the loss. "Do not chase numbers," she said. "Treat the cause." Brooks swallowed. That sounds hard, ma'am. It is. That is why nobody sings about easy medicine. Shaw looked toward the supply cabinet. I have standard clamps. Nothing that will sit cleanly in that space. Hannah did not move her hand. Call damage control. Captain Hale stepped into the doorway. What do you need? Small mechanical clamp. Narrow jaw, smooth as possible. Something used for fine hydraulic lines or aircraft work. It needs to hold without chewing through tissue. Hale turned immediately. Rowe, Ethan was already moving. He disappeared down the passageway with Brooks at his side. The monitor dipped again. Shaw watched Hannah hold pressure. How long can you keep that longer than he can? The answer was not comfort, it was math. By the time the Seahawk lifted Mason Cole toward shore, the storm had begun to break over Puget Sound. Not clear, not calm, just broken enough for a helicopter to cut through the gray and carry one more body toward a room with better lights, better tools, and people who had not been fighting the ocean for every inch of time. Hannah stayed aboard the USS Resolute, long enough to give the flight medic a report so clean it sounded almost impossible beside the blood still drying on her sleeves. Blunt left thoracic trauma. Hemothorax. Cardiac tamponade. Temporary vascular control achieved. Arrested twice. Return of pulse after internal massage and resuscitation. Pressure responsive but fragile. He needs vascular surgery, blood warming, and a room that does not move. The flight medic stared at her for half a second, then nodded. Understood. Hannah gripped the side of the litter as Mason's eyes fluttered under sedation. The wedding ring taped to the chain at his neck shifted with the vibration of the aircraft. She leaned close enough for him to hear if any part of him was still near the surface. Stay with the noise, Lieutenant. It means you're still moving. The corpsman loaded him in. The door shut. The Seahawk rose. For a few seconds, Hannah stood in the rotor wash with Ethan Rowe beside her and Captain Marcus Hale behind them. Rain cut across the deck in silver lines. The helicopter became a dark shape against the clouds, then a sound, then nothing but weather. Captain Hale looked at Hannah. My pilot is alive. She kept her eyes on the sky. He's not safe yet, no. Hale's voice changed, but he has a shore to reach. That was as close to thanks as command allowed him in front of his crew. Hannah accepted it with a nod. Inside the ship, the corridors seemed too narrow after the flight deck. Men and women in uniform stepped aside when she passed, and she felt their eyes follow the blood on her scrubs. Nobody cheered, nobody clapped. That would have been easier to ignore. Instead, they made room. They understood what a body looked like after it had carried risk. In sickbay, Dr. Peter Shaw stood at the sink washing his hands with slow, rough movements. The water ran pink around his wrists. He looked at Hannah in the mirror. I did not think that was possible in this room. Hannah leaned one shoulder against the wall. It almost wasn't. Shaw turned off the water. I froze for a second before you started. You didn't stay frozen. He looked down at his hands. That is a generous distinction. It is the only distinction that matters. He dried his hands with a towel that had already seen too much use. You were fired today. Hannah looked at the narrow table where Mason had been. The sheet was gone. The blood was not, yes. And then you came here, yes. Shaw gave a quiet, disbelieving laugh. Medicine has a strange sense of timing. Hannah pushed herself away from the wall. Medicine has no sense of timing. That is why it kills people who wait for perfect circumstances. Ethan met her outside sickbay. He had removed his helmet and his hair was damp with rain and sweat. For the first time since he had stepped out of the hospital elevator, the urgency had left him enough for exhaustion to show. You saved him, he said. Hannah walked beside him. I bought him distance. You always hated the word saved. I hate statues. They make people forget the mud underneath. Ethan did not answer right away. Their boots rang against the deck. The ship moved beneath them with slow force, as if the ocean still had an argument to finish. He looked at the dried blood on her sleeve. 2 patients in 1 day. Hannah's jaw tightened. 2 clocks, and 1 hospital that did not know how to read either. She stopped. The corridor hummed around them. Do not turn this into a clean story, Ethan. His eyes held hers. I wasn't trying to. Yes, you were. A sailor carrying equipment slowed nearby, sensed the air between them, and kept walking. Hannah lowered her voice. They will make me reckless if it protects them. They will make Thomas Grady an exception. They will make Mason Cole military drama. They will split the day into pieces until nobody has to look at the pattern. Ethan studied her. Then don't let them. She looked away first. The return flight to Tacoma was quieter. Hannah sat strapped into the Seahawk Arms folded stethoscope still around her neck. The city rose ahead through the thinning rain. Low clouds dragged over the water. The lights of the hospital appeared in the distance, cold and square against the morning. Her phone had no signal over the water. When it finally came back, the screen filled at once. Missed calls. Her father, Beck, unknown numbers, news alerts. She opened none of them. Ethan sat across from her. It's spreading. Hannah looked at him. What is... He handed her his phone. A video played without sound. The Rainier Harbor lobby. Hannah with the cardboard box. Klein near the security desk. The roof shaking. Ethan stepping out of the elevator. Someone had filmed from the second-floor railing. The caption read, Hospital Fires Trauma Surgeon. Navy lands minutes later asking for her by name. Hannah handed the phone back. Who posted it? Looks like a visitor. That visitor has excellent timing. It has been shared everywhere. She leaned her head back against the cabin wall. Of course it has. Ethan watched her. That might help you. It might also turn a patient's bad day into entertainment. Thomas Grady's wife has already spoken to a local reporter. That made Hannah open her eyes. What did she say? Ethan hesitated. She said her husband was alive because you did not wait for a man in a suit. Hannah closed her eyes again. June. She sounded angry. She should be with him. She is. The interview was from the ICU waiting room. The helicopter descended toward Rainier Harbor's roof. Hannah could see the helipad below slick with rain surrounded by emergency lights. This time, hospital security was waiting. So were 2 administrators, Beck and Caleb Mercer. Klein was not on the roof. Hannah noticed that first. The Seahawk touched down. The door opened. Cold wind slapped across her face as she climbed out. Beck crossed the pad before anyone could stop her. For a second, the nurse looked at the blood on Hannah's sleeves, the hollow under her eyes, the stethoscope still around her neck. Then Beck said, "You are a walking infection control violation." Hannah almost smiled. "Good to see you, too." Caleb stood behind Beck. He looked like he had not moved since Hannah left, only aged. "Mason Cole?" he asked. "Alive," Hannah said. "Critical." His shoulders dropped as if the word had been holding him up by the throat. An administrator in a gray coat stepped forward. "Dr. Voss, the board has requested your presence." Hannah looked at Beck. That was fast. Beck's mouth barely moved. The internet is faster than shame. The administrator cleared his throat. The hospital is convening an emergency review. Hannah looked toward the elevator. "Is Thomas Grady alive?" Caleb answered. "Yes. Dr. Bell got him through surgery. He is in ICU, intubated but stable." Hannah nodded once. "Then I will come." The boardroom sat on the 11th floor, high enough to see the water if the weather allowed it. That morning, the windows showed only gray rain and the blurred outline of Tacoma beyond the glass. Hannah entered still in borrowed Navy flight gear over bloodstained scrubs. No one had offered her time to change. Maybe that was careless. Maybe it was perfect. The room was full. Board members sat along one side of the long table. Hospital counsel sat near the end with 2 folders stacked in front of him. Risk management had sent 3 people. Dr. Warren Bell stood near the windows with his arms crossed. Beck sat beside Caleb. Dr. Adrian Klein sat at the head of the table, jaw-tight suit as perfect as it had been before the roof shook. He looked at Hannah as she entered. "You returned." Hannah pulled out a chair. "So did my patients." No one spoke for a moment. The board chair, a woman named Evelyn Marks, adjusted her glasses and looked from Klein to Hannah. "This review is being convened because of 2 critical incidents and the public attention surrounding them. We are here to establish facts." Klein leaned forward. "The facts are clear. Dr. Voss violated a newly implemented emergency authorization policy. She performed an invasive procedure without approval. She then left the facility with military personnel despite no active employment status or hospital credentialing connection to that mission." Hannah sat back. "You had terminated me before the Navy arrived. That does not absolve you of professional responsibility." "No," she said, "the patients did that." Counsel raised a hand. "Let us proceed in order." Klein opened a folder. Rainier Harbor cannot operate if individual physicians decide which policies apply to them. Dr. Voss acted outside chain of command, exposed this institution to liability, and created a dangerous precedent. Hannah watched him speak. He was good at this. Better here than at a bedside. His sentences had corners. His voice made fear sound like duty. Klein continued. "The outcome in Mr. Grady's case does not justify the method. Good results can still come from reckless conduct." Dr. Bell turned from the window. Thomas Grady was pulseless. Klein looked at him. "I am aware." Bell stepped closer to the table. "No, Adrian. You are aware of the chart. I am telling you what the body was doing. He had tamponade physiology and no time. If she had waited for me, I would have arrived to pronounce him or attempt salvage after preventable delay." Klein's mouth tightened. "You cannot know that." Bell's eyes hardened. "I opened him in the operating room. I know exactly how close he was." The board chair made a note. Beck spoke without being asked. There were nursing concerns filed before today. Counsel looked up. "Formal concerns." Beck nodded. 3. Klein turned toward her. "Those concerns were under review." Beck's voice stayed calm. "No, they were under a pile." A risk management officer shifted in his chair. "Can you clarify?" Beck looked at him. "Last week, a patient deteriorated during delay while staff waited for approval under the draft version of this policy. We were told the delay was unfortunate but not policy-related. Nurses documented concern that the new approval pathway was slowing critical care." Klein said, "That case is not relevant to Dr. Voss's insubordination." Hannah leaned forward then. "It is relevant to the clock." All eyes turned to her. She placed both hands on the table. Her right hand ached along the scar. Thomas Grady, 69. Obstructive shock from tamponade. Arrested in trauma 2. Correctable cause. No surgical lead present. Senior backup delayed. Compressions and drugs would not reverse the cause. He needed decompression before his brain ran out of oxygen. She turned one hand over as if laying the case in front of them. Lieutenant Mason Cole, 28. Blunt thoracic trauma. Hemothorax. Tamponade. Vascular injury. Arrested at sea. No trauma surgeon aboard. No stable transfer window. He needed intervention before weather distance and bleeding finished the job. She looked at Klein. Different rooms, same failure point. The board chair asked which was permission arrived slower than death. The room absorbed it badly. Caleb shifted beside Beck. He looked down at his hands, then lifted his head. I was in trauma too. The board chair turned toward him. Dr. Mercer. Caleb swallowed. I am a first-year resident. I know how that sounds. I know I am not the person in this room with the most experience. Klein said softly. Then choose your words carefully. Caleb looked at him, then at Hannah. I froze. Hannah did not move. Caleb continued. I knew the policy. I knew Dr. Bell was not there. I knew Dr. Voss was about to cross a line. And for a second I thought the safest thing was to stay inside the rule. His voice tightened. Then I looked at the monitor. Mr. Grady had no pulse. His wife was outside the glass, holding his glove. The only thing standing between him and death was whether someone in the room understood the cause better than they feared the consequence. Klein said, That is emotional reasoning. Caleb turned toward him. No, it is clinical reasoning with a witness. Beck's eyes flicked to him, proud and sad at the same time. Counsel wrote something down. The door opened quietly. June Grady entered with a nurse beside her. She looked small in the boardroom, swallowed by glass leather chairs and people who had not stood outside Trauma 2 while her husband died. In both hands, she held the brown work glove. The board chair stood. Mrs. Grady, you do not have to do this right now. June looked at Hannah first, then at Klein. Yes, I do. She sat at the end of the table, her hands wrapped around the glove. My husband fixed ferries for 37 years, she said. He knew machines. He used to say every system has a sound when something is wrong. You can ignore it for a while, but the sound does not go away. No one interrupted. I stood outside that room and watched people hit his chest. I watched that screen. I saw Dr. Voss look at the door, waiting for someone who was not coming fast enough. Then I saw her make a decision. Her thumb moved over the worn leather. I do not know your policies. I do not know your titles. I know my husband was gone and then he was not. Klein kept his face still. Mrs. Grady, we are very grateful for your husband's current stability, but this review concerns procedural compliance. June looked at him as if he had spoken in another language. My husband was not a procedure. The sentence landed without volume and broke something anyway. Dr. Bell looked down. Beck closed her eyes for 1 second. June placed the glove on the table. This fell off in the ambulance. I held it because I did not know what else to hold. Dr. Voss was the only person in that room who looked like she understood that I was not holding a glove. I was holding time. Hannah stared at the table. She did not trust her face. The board chair's voice was quieter when she spoke. Thank you, Mrs. Grady. June stood. Before leaving, she touched Hannah's shoulder once. No speech, no performance, just the weight of a hand. When the door closed, the room felt smaller. A screen at the far wall lit up. Commander Ethan Rowe appeared on secure video from the Navy hospital. Behind him, the blurred movement of a critical care unit showed through glass. The board chair addressed him. Commander Rowe, thank you for joining. Ethan nodded. Lieutenant Cole is in surgery. He arrived alive because Dr. Voss created enough time for the receiving team to work. Klein leaned toward the microphone. Commander, were you aware Dr. Voss had been terminated immediately before your request? Yes. Were you aware she lacked formal authorization from this institution? Ethan's expression did not change. I was aware your institution had chosen not to use her. Klein's eyes narrowed. The Navy cannot simply take civilian physicians from hospitals. We did not take her, we asked her. And why Dr. Voss Ethan looked into the camera. because the Navy has a long memory when someone keeps a man alive under impossible conditions. The room was silent. He continued. 8 years ago, Dr. Voss operated on me in a forward surgical tent while our perimeter was under attack. She did not ignore command. She understood the mission: preserve life until evacuation. Today was the same mission in a different storm. Klein said, "This hospital is not a battlefield." Ethan's voice remained even. "No. But the human body does not become more patient because the walls are nicer." Hannah looked down at her hands. The scar across her right hand seemed pale under the boardroom lights. The screen went dark after Ethan's testimony. Risk management began presenting documents. At first the language was careful. Then the careful language began to open doors Klein had wanted shut. The new emergency policy had been implemented before full review by emergency medicine leadership. Nursing concerns had not been escalated to the board. Dr. Bell had requested clarification on time-critical exceptions and received no final answer. A quality note from the prior week described delayed intervention in a hypotensive fall patient. The note had been marked pending administrative review. The board chair looked at Klein. Why was there no exception? Pathway. Klein adjusted his cuffs. The policy was designed to reduce uncontrolled procedural variance. Exceptions create ambiguity. Bell laughed once without humor. Patients create ambiguity. Klein ignored him. A firm approval chain protects patients from impulsive action. Hannah looked up. And who protects them from administrative paralysis? Klein turned on her. You keep reducing this to a slogan. No, she said. I am reducing it to a bedside. He stood. You believe every rule should bend to your judgment. Hannah stood too slower. I believe a rule that cannot recognize a dying patient is not a rule. It is furniture. Counsel, said Dr. Voss. But she did not sit. You are afraid of chaos, Dr. Klein. I understand that. I have seen chaos. It does not look like a doctor making a documented clinically necessary decision in front of a team. It looks like a room full of trained people waiting for permission while the monitor goes flat. Klein's face hardened. You are dangerous because people admire you. Hannah's voice dropped. No, I am dangerous to you because I make the delay visible. The board chair called for a recess. No one moved at first. Then chairs shifted, papers closed. Rain tapped against the windows. Hannah stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall. The adrenaline that had carried her through the helicopter, the ship, the surgery, and the hearing began to thin. Her knees felt hollow. Beck came out with 2 paper cups of coffee. You look like you're about to fall through the floor. Hannah took one. Is this hospital coffee? Yes. Then I might survive the floor. Beck stood beside her. June was good. June should not have had to be good. No. Caleb came out next. He looked shaken. I called him out. You told the truth. My hands were sweating so much I thought I would drop the microphone. You did not. He looked at her. Do you think they will reinstate you? Hannah stared into the coffee. That is not the question I care about. Beck knew. Caleb did not. What as Hannah looked through the glass wall toward the emergency department far below? Tiny figures moved under white lights. Patients arrived. Nurses leaned over beds. Phones rang. Somewhere a clock was already running. If they put me back in that room and leave the policy untouched, then all they have done is make one exception. They can regret later. Caleb's face changed as he understood. The board called them back in. The chair spoke after a long silence. Dr. Klein, pending formal investigation, you are being placed on administrative leave. The emergency intervention policy is suspended immediately. Klein sat very still. A colorless calm passed over his face. The chair turned to Hannah. Dr. Voss, the board is prepared to reinstate your privileges while review continues. Beck exhaled quietly. Caleb looked at Hannah. Hannah did not answer at once. The room waited. Then she said, "Putting me back in the emergency department changes one shift." The board chair frowned slightly. "What are you asking for?" Hannah looked at Bell, then Beck, then Caleb. A time-critical intervention pathway. Clear clinical criteria. Team confirmation when possible. Nursing escalation authority. Immediate documentation. Surgical notification without delay. Review within 24 hours. Legal analysis after stabilization, not during collapse. Counsel began writing. Bell nodded once. Beck's mouth curved almost into a smile. Klein stared at the table. The board chair asked, "And who would design this pathway?" Hannah looked out at the rain. For a second she saw Thomas behind glass, June holding the glove, Mason on a table at sea, Ethan's younger face under dust and blood, Caleb frozen then moving, Beck turning fear into orders. She looked back at the board. Not me alone. The answer surprised them. Hannah continued. Emergency physicians, surgeons, nurses, residents, risk management, legal. People who understand the bedside and people who understand what happens after. If courage stays personal, it dies when the person leaves the room. Build it into the system or do not pretend today changed anything. The board chair studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Begin immediately. Klein stood without waiting to be dismissed. No one stopped him. At the door, he paused and looked back at Hannah. You think this will prevent mistakes? Hannah shook her head. No. He seemed caught by that. She said, but it might prevent fear from being the only voice in the room. Klein had no answer. He left. The rain against the windows softened. Downstairs, the emergency department kept working. Thomas Grady slept in the ICU with his wife beside him. Mason Cole fought under bright surgical lights miles away. The video kept spreading across phones, stripped of context, heavy with emotion, carrying Hannah's face into rooms where strangers would decide what kind of doctor they believed she was. Hannah did not watch it. She walked back toward the elevators with Beck and Caleb beside her. At the end of the hall, Dr. Bell waited. He looked at her stained scrubs, the navy jacket, the exhaustion she could no longer hide. You need sleep. Hannah pressed the elevator button. I need a shower first. Bell grunted. And then sleep. The doors opened. Hannah stepped inside. Caleb caught the door before it closed. Dr. Voss. She looked at him. He searched for the right words and found only the honest ones. What do we do now? Hannah held his gaze. We build something that gets there before permission does. Caleb let go of the door. The elevator closed around her, and for the first time that day there was no alarm, no rotor thunder, no monitor screaming for a decision. Only the hum of descent. Only the rain. Only the sound of a hospital being forced to listen. The elevator carried Hannah down through the hospital, and for the first time that day, no one was running beside her. No corpsman, no security, no administrator trying to catch her before the next sentence landed wrong. Just the low hum of the elevator, the soft blink of floor numbers, and the rain sliding down the glass wall behind her reflection. She looked at herself in the steel door. Navy flight jacket. Scrubs stiff with dried blood. Hair half fallen from its tie. Stethoscope around her neck like a thing that had survived dismissal, flight storm, and surgery without asking anyone what it was allowed to be. Her phone buzzed again. Dad. This time she answered. Hannah. His voice came through rough with worry. I'm here. There was a pause. Not relief yet. He had been a medic in his own younger life. He knew that here did not always mean safe. I saw the news. Hannah closed her eyes. Which part? The part where they said you were fired, the part where the Navy came, the part where every anchor in Seattle is pretending they understand emergency medicine. That almost pulled a laugh from her. I'm okay. No, you're not. The elevator slowed. She opened her eyes. No. Her father breathed once through the line. But you're standing, yes. Then eat something, shower, sleep. In that order, if you still remember how orders work. The doors opened to the staff corridor outside the emergency department. Hannah stepped out. I'll call you later. You always say that when you mean after the next disaster. She looked through the glass at the ER. The department had not paused for her return. It had only shifted around the space she had left. A nurse hung fluids. A child cried behind a curtain. A paramedic signed a form with wet sleeves. Beck stood at the desk, head bent over a chart, already back inside the work. Hannah said quietly, "This one is different." Her father heard the change. How? She watched Caleb move through the department with a chart in one hand and exhaustion written across his face. He stopped at Trauma 2, looked through the open doorway, and then kept walking. Hannah said, "This one has to outlive me." Her father said nothing for a moment. Then softer, "That is a heavy thing to build, tired. I know. Build it anyway." The line went dead after he told her he loved her, and she said it back too quickly because if she said it slowly she might feel it. She did not go home. She showered in the staff locker room, standing under water so hot it turned the room white with steam. Blood came away in pale red streams. Thomas Grady's blood. Mason Cole's blood. Blood from rooms that were not rooms anymore, only flashes behind her eyes. When she stepped out, Beck had left clean scrubs folded on the bench and a sandwich wrapped in paper beside them. There was a note on top. "Eat before you become a legal liability." Hannah sat on the bench and ate half the sandwich without tasting it. Then she went upstairs. The first meeting began before noon. The board gave them Conference Room C, the same room where Klein had introduced the policy that morning. The same glass walls, the same long table, the same rain. This time Klein was gone. His chair at the head of the table sat empty. Nobody mentioned it at first. Dr. Warren Bell arrived with a surgical cap still in his pocket. Beck came with a binder full of nursing notes and a face that told every administrator in the room not to waste her time. Caleb came because Hannah asked him to, and because he had seen the first failure up close. Risk management came with laptops. Legal came with cautious eyes. Quality and safety sent two people who spoke in careful sentences until Bell told them to use smaller words because patients bled in plain English. Hannah stood at the board with a marker in her hand. She had slept 40 minutes in an on-call room and looked like it. The board chair, Evelyn Marks, took a seat near the end. "Dr. Voss," she said, "where do you want to start?" Hannah uncapped the marker. With the clock. She wrote the word at the top of the board. Clock. Below it, she wrote 3 questions. What is killing the patient? Can it be reversed now? Will waiting change survival? No one spoke. Hannah turned back to the room. If a patient is dying from something reversible and the reversal is time-dependent, the approval pathway cannot be longer than the patient's remaining oxygen, blood pressure, or circulation. A legal officer raised his hand. How do we define time-dependent without opening the door to subjective judgment? Bell leaned back. Medicine is judgment. The legal officer looked uncomfortable. Hannah lifted a hand before Bell could sharpen that sentence. We define it with criteria, not feelings, not ego, objective triggers, ultrasound findings, loss of pulse, persistent shock, failure of standard resuscitation. clinical signs that match a known reversible cause. Beck opened her binder, and nursing escalation must be part of it. The legal officer looked at her, meaning Beck did not blink, meaning the nurse at the bedside can call the clock out loud. If the nurse sees the patient deteriorating while the team is waiting for approval, that concern gets documented and escalated immediately. Not after a committee, not after a death. One of the risk management staff typed quickly. Caleb sat near the back, quiet, hands folded. Hannah noticed he had not opened his notebook. That was good. Some things had to enter the body before they entered paper. They argued for 6 hours. Not loudly at first, then loudly. Bell wanted broad authority for experienced attendings. Legal wanted narrow categories. Beck wanted a clear voice for nurses because nurses saw decline between physician visits and too often had to speak through hierarchy before anyone listened. Risk management wanted post-event review. Hannah wanted all of it tied to the patient, not the title of the person in the room. By dusk, the whiteboard was crowded with words, arrows, circles, crossed-out phrases, and one sentence Hannah refused to erase. The protocol exists to move care forward when delay is more dangerous than action. The legal officer stood near the board, arms crossed. That sentence is not legal language. No, Hannah said, it is human language. Legal can translate it later. Beck murmured, put that on a plaque. Caleb finally spoke. What if 2 people disagree? Everyone turned. His voice was careful, but it did not shake. What if the resident thinks the criteria are met, but the attending on the phone says to wait? Or the nurse thinks the patient is worse than the doctor realizes? Or the surgeon says they are coming, but they are 10 minutes away and the patient has 2? Hannah looked at him for a long second. That is the question. She wrote another line. 2, person confirmation when possible. 1 person activation when delay is immediately life-threatening and criteria are documented. The legal officer nearly stood. That is a problem. Hannah looked at him. So is a dead patient. Evelyn Marks interlaced her fingers. Can we make review mandatory? Yes, Hannah said. Every activation reviewed within 24 hours. Not to punish people first, to learn first. If someone misuses it, we address that. If the protocol is unclear, we fix it. If the system failed to provide backup, we do not blame the person who stayed with the patient. Bell nodded. That I can support. Beck said, and no quiet retaliation. The room shifted. Beck continued, if a nurse triggers escalation and an attending feels embarrassed, that nurse is protected. If a resident activates under criteria and the outcome is bad, the review looks at the facts, not the easiest target. Hannah wrote it down. Protection for good faith activation. Caleb stared at those words. Something in his face changed. Later, long after most of the hospital had moved into night rhythm, Hannah stood alone in conference room C and looked at the board. Voss criteria. Someone else had written the name in the corner. She hated it. Names turned systems into monuments. Monuments made people forget the work. She erased the corner with her sleeve. Then she wrote it again. Not because she liked it, because the name would make people remember why it existed. The first simulation took place 3 days later. The mannequin lay in Trauma 1 with painted bruising on the chest and a monitor programmed to fail at a realistic speed. The room was full of residents, nurses, techs, and attendings who did not want to admit they were nervous in front of plastic. Hannah stood near the wall with a tablet. Beck ran the nursing team. Bell watched from the doorway with his arms crossed and his expression set to permanent disapproval, which everyone had learned meant he was paying attention. Caleb led the first scenario. The patient was unstable after blunt trauma. Pressure falling. Airway secured, fluids running. Ultrasound equivocal. Surgical backup delayed. Caleb called for repeat vitals. Ordered blood, asked for another scan. His voice stayed steady until the monitor dipped. Beck called pressure 60 over palp. Caleb looked toward Hannah. Hannah said nothing. He looked at the monitor. Continue resuscitation. Beck's eyes narrowed. Doctor, pressure is falling. Ultrasound shows free fluid. We have not activated. Caleb swallowed. I want one more pressure. The mannequin arrested. The monitor went flat. The room went silent. Hannah let the silence sit. Then she said, pause. No one moved. Caleb's face reddened. I waited too long. Hannah walked to the foot of the bed. Why, I wanted to be sure. Bell grunted from the doorway. Certainty is often an autopsy finding. Beck gave him a look. Hannah kept her eyes on Caleb. What did you have shock? Blunt trauma. Positive ultrasound. No immediate surgeon. Standard measures failing. What did the protocol give you? Activation. What did fear ask for? One more number. Hannah nodded. That is where patients disappear. Caleb looked down. I killed the mannequin. You learned on plastic. That is why we are here. They ran it again. This time Caleb activated earlier. He called the criteria out loud. Beck repeated them. The scribe documented time. Blood moved. Surgery was notified. The team shifted with purpose instead of panic. At the end, Hannah said only, better. Caleb looked as if better meant more than praise. The protocol did not settle into the hospital cleanly. Nothing real did. Some attendings grumbled that administration had surrendered to public pressure. Some residents loved the new pathway too quickly, which worried Hannah more than resistance. Confidence without weight was just another kind of danger. Nurses understood it first. They had been living with clocks no one else heard. On the 6th day, a resident activated Voss criteria for a severe allergic reaction that responded to epinephrine and airway support. The patient stabilized without invasive intervention. The review was tense. The resident sat across from Hannah, ashamed. I thought I was doing what you said. Hannah opened the chart. You were trying to act early. That part is good, but criteria are not a permission slip for fear. He looked up. She pointed to the vitals. The patient was unstable, but the reversible cause responded to standard measures. The protocol requires failure of stabilization or a time-critical lesion that stabilization cannot fix. You had a crisis. You did not yet have a protocol activation. The resident nodded slowly. So I was wrong. You were early. There is a difference. The review exists so early does not become reckless. Beck, sitting beside her, added, and so scared does not become silent. The resident breathed out. Am I in trouble? Hannah looked at legal, then at quality, then back at him. No, you documented. You called for help. You stayed with the patient. We trained from this. After that, people began to trust the review. Not because it was soft, because it was fair. 2 weeks passed. Thomas Grady came off the ventilator on a Sunday morning. Hannah did not visit until June, asked 3 times through Beck, and then threatened to come downstairs with hospital socks and a bad attitude. When Hannah entered the ICU room, Thomas was propped against pillows thinner than before, but very much alive. June sat beside him with the brown glove in her lap. Thomas turned his head slowly. So you're the doctor who ruined my nap. Hannah stood near the foot of the bed. I heard you were difficult before I arrived. June smiled. He was worse. Thomas lifted one hand weakly. They told me I died. Briefly, did I embarrass myself? You were very quiet, not like me. No. June watched Hannah with eyes that had cried enough and did not intend to waste more tears unless forced. They are saying your name on the news. Hannah shifted. People say a lot of things. Thomas looked at her. My wife says you do not like being thanked. Your wife is observant. Then I will not thank you. Good. He closed his eyes for a breath, then opened them again. I will just keep breathing. Hannah's expression softened. That works. June held up the glove. I'm having this framed. Thomas frowned. That thing is filthy, June said. So are most miracles. Hannah looked away toward the window. Outside, the rain had stopped for the first time in days. Sunlight touched the side of another hospital tower and made the glass burn white. Mason Cole survived his second surgery. The update came through Ethan 3 days later. Hannah was in the simulation lab resetting a scenario when her phone buzzed. Ethan's message was short. Cole opened his eyes, asked about the aircraft, then asked about his wife. In that order, thought you should know. Hannah stared at the screen longer than necessary. Then another message appeared. His wife says thank you. I told her you hate that. Hannah typed back. Tell her he brought the aircraft home. A minute later, Ethan replied. He already knows. You told him. Hannah put the phone face down and returned to the mannequin. There were still people to train. Klein left Rainier Harbor on a Friday afternoon. No announcement. No press conference. No apology folded into a hospital statement. Just an elevator ride down a cardboard box in his hands and a silence around him that felt less like cruelty than consequence. Hannah saw him in the lobby. For a strange second, the scene mirrored her own exit. Same security desk, same polished floor, same glass doors looking out toward the wet street. But no rotor thunder came for him. He stopped when he saw her. The box in his arms held framed photos, a desk nameplate and a small award shaped like a glass flame. They stood several feet apart. Visitors passed between them without knowing they were crossing the seam of a story the hospital would be telling for years. Klein spoke first. You got what you wanted. Hannah looked at the box. No. His mouth tightened. You wanted me gone? I wanted patients not to die waiting for signatures. For a moment, anger moved through his face, then tiredness covered it. You think this new protocol will prevent mistakes? No. That answer seemed to catch him. Hannah continued. It will make different ones. He stared at her. That is not very reassuring. It is honest. Outside, rain began again, light against the glass. Hannah said, Your policy was not evil because it cared about risk. It was dangerous because it cared about only one kind. Klein looked toward the ER corridor. You believe I did not care about patients. I believe you cared from too far away. The words struck him more deeply than she expected. For a second, his eyes dropped. When he looked back, the polished answer was gone. I saw a child die during my residency, he said. Hannah did not move. Klein's voice was low. Procedure went wrong. Attending acted fast. Too fast, everyone said later. Lawsuit, inquiry, career ruined, family destroyed. I remember thinking if someone had slowed the room down, maybe she would have lived. The lobby noise softened around them. Hannah said, So you built a room that could not move. His jaw worked once. He did not deny it. A car pulled up outside. Klein adjusted the box in his arms. I still think you are dangerous. Hannah held his gaze. I am. He looked surprised. She said so is a scalpel, so is blood, so is delay. The question is whether the danger is held by people who understand what it can do. Klein looked at her for a long time. Then he walked out into the rain. Hannah watched until the car pulled away. She did not forgive him in that moment. Forgiveness was not a switch. But she understood the shape of his fear better, and understanding was another kind of burden. A month later, the real test came without Hannah in the room. It was 9:18 on a Thursday night. Rain hit the ambulance bay in hard bursts. The ER was full, but not drowning. Hannah was upstairs teaching a simulation session to surgical residents who kept trying to solve trauma with confidence instead of sequence. Downstairs, the radio cracked alive. Medic 4 inbound. 36-year-old female. Motor vehicle collision. Restrained driver. Abdominal pain. Pale. Pressure dropping. ETA 2 minutes. Beck looked up from the desk. Caleb was the attending resident on the floor, supervised by a senior physician who had stepped into a stroke consult. He heard the call and felt his pulse rise. Trauma 1. The doors opened. Elise Warren arrived, soaked in rain and glass dust, conscious but fading. A paramedic walked beside the stretcher with one hand holding pressure over a scalp wound. Driver, side impact. Airbag deployed. Complaining of belly pain, became hypotensive 5 minutes out. Elise's eyes moved wildly. "My kids," she whispered. "There were kids in the car." The paramedic answered quickly. "Children are at Harbor Children's, awake, talking." Elise tried to lift her head. "My kids." Caleb stepped into her line of sight. "Elise, I'm Dr. Mercer. Your children are being treated. Right now, I need you to stay with me." Her skin was pale. Her hands were cold. Her abdomen was rigid under his exam. Beck placed leads. Pressure 82/48. 2 large-bore IVs, Caleb said. Blood now. Fast exam. The ultrasound probe felt slick in his gloved hand. He placed it. The image came up, free fluid. His throat tightened. Positive fast. Beck looked at him. Pressure. The nurse at the monitor answered. 76 systolic. Caleb looked toward the hall. The senior physician was still away. Surgery was in the operating room with a ruptured aneurysm. Bell was on call but not in the building. The old policy would have filled the room with waiting. Caleb heard Hannah's voice from the simulation lab. "What did you have shock?" "Blunt trauma. Positive ultrasound. No immediate surgeon, standard measures failing. What did the protocol give you activation?" He looked at Beck. "Activate Voss criteria." The room changed, not louder, sharper. Beck repeated Voss criteria activated. Time 21:24. Criteria are blunt abdominal trauma, persistent hypotension, positive fast surgical delay. The scribe wrote. Blood was called. Surgery was paged with activation language that could not be softened by hierarchy. Caleb moved to the head of the bed. "Elise, you are bleeding inside your abdomen. We are moving quickly." Her eyes filled with tears. "My kids, I know. Don't let them be alone." Caleb's chest tightened, but his voice stayed steady. "You stay with us, and you can tell them yourself." Her pressure dropped again. A junior nurse asked, "Do we have approval?" Caleb did not look away from Elise. "We have criteria." Beck's eyes flicked to him. There it was. Not fearlessness. Something better. Fear with a job. They moved Elise toward the operating floor with blood running and the trauma team already formed around her. Bell met them at the elevator, hair damp from raincoat half buttoned over scrubs. He had driven in fast enough to make nobody ask about speed limits. Caleb gave report. Blunt trauma. Positive fast. Persistent hypotension. 2 units started. Voss criteria activated at 21:24. Surgery notified. No response to initial stabilization. Bell listened, eyes on Elise, not on Caleb. When Caleb finished, Bell said, "Good activation," 2 words. They carried more weight than praise. Upstairs, Hannah arrived at the OR hallway after Elise had already gone through the doors. She stopped when she saw Beck and Caleb standing outside, both breathing as if they had just surfaced from deep water. What happened? Caleb turned. For 1 second he looked like the young resident from Thomas Grady's room again. Pale, shaken, waiting for judgment. Then he straightened. Motor vehicle collision. Positive fast. Hypotension. Surgical delay. I activated Voss criteria. Hannah looked through the OR doors. You did, yes. Before I got here. His mouth twitched once. That was the idea, wasn't it? Beck looked away, hiding a smile. Hannah studied Caleb. His gloves were bloody. His hair was damp with sweat. His hands trembled now after the decision when it was safe for them to tremble. Were you scared? Yes. Good. He looked down. Still hate that answer. You will hate it less when it keeps you honest. The OR doors opened. Bell stepped out long enough to call for more blood. He saw Hannah. Your resident got her here alive. Hannah did not correct the word your. Bell disappeared back inside. Caleb sat down on a bench in the hallway. For a while, he said nothing. Hannah sat beside him. Beck stayed standing, arms folded, guarding them both from interruption. After several minutes, Caleb said, I heard the old rule in my head. Hannah waited. It sounded safe. Yes. Then I heard your question. Which one? What is killing the patient? Hannah looked down the hall. That question is older than me, but you made us answer it out loud. The hallway lights hummed above them. Caleb rubbed his hands together, though the gloves were gone. If she dies, did I still do it right? Hannah looked at him then. No easy answer. No false comfort. He deserved better. If she dies, we review everything. The indication, the timing, the execution, the communication. We look for what could have been done better. He nodded slowly. And if the activation was correct, then you carry the outcome, but you do not confess to the wrong crime. His eyes reddened. I do not know how you do this. Hannah looked toward the OR doors. I do not always do it well. That was the most honest thing she had said to him. Elise Warren survived. The surgery lasted 3 hours. Spleen injury, massive bleeding, close call. Bell came out near 1 in the morning and found Caleb asleep upright in a chair, arms crossed, chin to chest. Beck sat beside him with a paper cup of coffee gone cold. Hannah stood at the window at the end of the hall looking out at the helipad lights. Bell walked up beside her. She made it. Hannah closed her eyes once. Good. Your protocol worked. She opened her eyes. No. The team worked. Bell grunted. You are very stubborn about not enjoying victories. I enjoy them when the patient wakes up. She will. Below, the city glowed, wet and dark. Bell said Klein was not wrong about everything. Hannah glanced at him. Bell kept looking out the window. Rules matter. The young ones need boundaries. Old ones, too. I have seen brave physicians do stupid things and call it instinct. So have I. But he built a wall where there should have been a gate. Hannah watched the rain move through the helipad lights. A gate with a clock. Bell nodded. A gate with a clock. Elise woke 2 days later. Her children visited the next morning with bandages, stuffed animals, and the solemn bravery of kids who had been told adults were fine when they were not. Elise cried when she saw them. Caleb stood outside the room with the chart pressed against his chest. Hannah joined him. He watched Elise hold her children with careful arms. She asked who made the call. What did you tell her that the team did? Hannah nodded. Good answer. She wants to thank everyone. Let her. He looked at Hannah. You going in? No. Why, she needs to look at her kids, not at us. Caleb thought about that. You really do hate statues. Yes, even small ones, especially small ones. They fit on desks and start giving people ideas. He laughed quietly. This time, the laugh stayed. The hospital changed in small ways before it changed in official ones. A nurse spoke up sooner during a trauma case, and nobody punished her for it. A resident asked for criteria instead of permission and got both help and correction. A surgeon who had once rolled his eyes at Voss criteria activated it himself during a ruptured ectopic pregnancy and later admitted privately that the language had saved time. The whiteboard in Trauma 1 gained a small clock drawn in black marker. No one knew who put it there. Beck denied it badly. Hannah saw it one morning and said nothing. Months passed. Rainier Harbor did not become a perfect hospital. No real hospital did. Patients still died. Families still cried in hallways. Doctors still argued. Nurses still carried too much. Administrators still used words that made Beck threaten to throw markers. But the room moved differently when time narrowed. That was the change. Not glory, muscle memory. One afternoon, Thomas Grady returned to the emergency department walking with a cane he clearly hated. June walked beside him carrying a rectangular frame wrapped in brown paper. Beck saw them first. "Look who escaped cardiology follow-up." Thomas pointed his cane at her. "I was invited. You were tolerated." Hannah came out from Trauma 2 wiping her hands on a towel. Thomas looked stronger, thinner but stronger. June's smile reached her eyes now. "We brought something June said." Thomas handed Hannah the frame. She unwrapped it. Inside was the brown leather glove, cleaned but not polished, mounted against dark fabric. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, "For the doctor who understood the clock." Hannah stared at it. The ER noise seemed to drift farther away. "I cannot take this." June's face sharpened. "Yes, you can," Thomas said. She practiced that tone all morning. June ignored him. "You told me to keep it because he would want it when he woke up." "He did. Then he told me it belonged to the story, and I told him the story belonged here." Hannah swallowed. Thomas leaned on his cane. "I am not thanking you." "Good. I am just informing you I remain inconveniently alive." Hannah looked at him. "That is acceptable." June stepped forward and hugged her. Hannah stood still at first, then gently returned it. Across the department, Caleb watched. Beck stood beside him. "Careful," Beck said. "You are witnessing a statue being installed." Caleb smiled. "No, that is not a statue. What is it?" He looked at Hannah holding the framed glove. A reminder. That evening, Hannah hung the frame not in her office, but in the staff corridor, outside the trauma bays where residents, nurses, techs, surgeons, and paramedics passed it on their way into rooms where seconds mattered. No speech, no ceremony, just the glove, just the clock. The final storm of the season came hard. It rolled over Tacoma after midnight, rattling windows and turning the streets silver. Rain hammered the ambulance bay. Wind bent the trees outside the hospital entrance. Above the roof, the helipad lights blinked through sheets of water. Inside Rainier Harbor, the emergency department moved with the strange focus that came when weather pushed the whole city toward injury. Beck stood at the nurses' station calling out bed assignments. Caleb, now steadier around the eyes, checked an ultrasound machine and argued with a monitor cable. Hannah stood at the board, reading names, complaints, numbers, patterns. The radio crackled. Military medevac inbound. 5 minutes. Severe thoracic trauma. Unstable. Assisted ventilation. Possible crush injury. Requesting trauma team on arrival. No one froze. Beck reached for the trauma phone. Trauma 1. Caleb grabbed the ultrasound. Blood protocol already calling. Beck said. A nurse moved toward the warmer. Another cleared the bay. A tech checked suction. Respiratory was paged. Surgery was notified. Hannah watched the room for one breath. It was not calm. Calm was overrated. It was ready. The elevator from the roof chimed in the distance. Wind pushed cold air down the shaft. Hannah walked toward Trauma 1 with Caleb on her left and Beck already ahead of them. The stethoscope rested against her chest, not as proof, not as a weapon, as a tool. The elevator doors opened. 2 military medics rushed out with a litter between them, rainwater streaming off their jackets. The patient's face was pale under the oxygen mask. Blood spotted the blanket. The monitor showed a rhythm that was trying and failing to be enough. The lead medic called out 24-year-old male. Training accident. Chest compression injury, hypotensive en route. Diminished left breath sounds, pressure dropping. Hannah took the head of the bed. "I'm Dr. Voss. You're at Rainier Harbor." The patient's eyes fluttered. Around her, the team moved. Caleb placed the probe in her hand before she asked. Beck called out pressure 74 systolic. Hannah looked once at the monitor, once at the patient, once at the room. The old hospital might have waited for the right person to arrive. This one had already become the right room. Hannah said, "Let's make the clock work for us." The trauma doors closed. Above the hospital, the Navy aircraft lifted back into the rain. Below it, Rainier Harbor did not wait for permission to understand the emergency. It listened to the body. It read the clock, and it moved.